Well, good afternoon or good morning to all of you that are joining us today on this wonderful opportunity that's provided by Plant-Based World to present a topic of just food as medicine. And at the outset, I just want to thank the Plant-Based World team, including Joel and Ben Davis, for helping to arrange this webinar in partnership with the Plant Nutrition Project. Hey, Ben, nice to see you. Thanks so much. We really appreciate you so much. And I know that you all and all of us have had to pivot in many opposite directions due to the pandemic. But thanks to technology, we're making the best of it and finding the silver lining in the clouds, I think. One of the benefits of this kind of technology is it allows us to connect with people all over the world. And I think, as we're doing today, sharing this really important message about food as medicine. And it really is, it couldn't be any more timely as all of the research is coming out on the COVID-19 pandemic, that the majority of the cases of hospitalization, severe ICU cases, and death are related to people that are suffering from lifestyle-related diseases that include obesity, heart disease, hypertension, lung disease, and immunocompromised status. So food and lifestyle are at the core of both preventative and protective measures for the COVID-19 pandemic, but we don't hear a lot of that in the news today. But that's what we're going to talk about today. And for those of you that might be new to this message, I'm going to start at the basics and just take the next 20-30 minutes and review a little bit about the food as medicine message and talk about some of the science, and end with a little bit on how you can boost your immune system, which is so important for all of us. I want to leave the last 30 minutes open for questions. And if you have any questions, you can direct those in the chat icon at the bottom of the Zoom meeting window. And I think it may make it easier for Tom, who's our moderator today. If you just, at the bottom, you'll see when you click the chat icon, you can say, there's a little blue box that will say chat to everyone or chat to Tom Dunham. For direct questions that you'd like to ask me, you can just include those to Tom Dunham. But if you have other chats that you'd like to share with the group, please feel free to do that. This is a dynamic community, and we're all learning to grow together and try to improve ourselves, our families, and our communities. So we're just, I just want to say that we appreciate you. We're grateful that you took some time out today. And I will spend as much time as necessary answering your questions to the best of my ability. So I'm just going to jump in and share my screen, and we'll start on the presentation today. And it's really the topic of food as medicine, as just as a little bit of background for you all and some context as to who I am. I started this journey about 18 years ago when I noticed that my patients were not getting better. And I had always thought that I would go into medicine, I would take care of people, and they would get better and go home. But I saw the opposite in my practice. I saw that people were coming in to see me. I was managing their chronic degenerative conditions just the way that I had been taught in my medical school and residency career. But there was a growing burden of disease that was eroding their quality of life. And there was a day in my practice, a woman asked me, she said, Dr. Stoll, can't you help me? I'm falling apart. And I simply asked her the question, what does falling apart mean to you? And she began to describe how her quality of life and those things that are most valuable to all of us were being eroded by the diseases that were on her past medical history list. And then with tears running down her cheeks, she said, Dr. Stoll, can you help me? And I realized in that moment that I had not been trained to actually help somebody put their life back together again. And I also remembered and recalled that I had never learned the source of these diseases. Where do these diseases come from? What causes high blood pressure, hypertension, and cancer? So I started a 2-year personal research journey to try and identify where these diseases come from. And was it actually possible to help someone put their life back together again? It took me on an extensive journey to try and understand. I read all the diet books and was more confused than when I started. And I finally came back to the research and began to discover this beautiful green thread throughout the entire research, that the more whole plants that people eat, the healthier they become. And not only preventatively and protectively against disease, but they could actually begin to reverse disease with the right diet. So armed with that information, I took my little prescription pad and began to write breakfast, lunch, and dinner for my patients, and I saw remarkable transformations in my patients' lives. And then recognizing that this journey was a challenge for me, both understanding the science of food as medicine and implementing food as medicine in my medical practice, I set out with two partners, Tom Dunham and Susan Benegas, to start the Plantrition Project to educate, equip, empower, and inspire healthcare providers around the world to utilize whole food plant-based nutrition as a core foundational pillar in their practice of medicine. And through the last 7 years, we've hosted conferences in a number of states in the United States, as well as assisting and starting conferences in Australia, Saudi Arabia, and coming up 2021, Bangkok, Thailand. One of the joys in the last 2 years has been our partnership with Plant-Based World. And we were really blessed in 2019 to host our first conference associated with the first Plant-Based World in New York City. And it was a smashing success. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that again this year, but we will be back in 2021. So why are we in the position that we're in today globally when we see that we have 600 million people around the world that are obese and nearly 2 billion people that are overweight? And for the first time in history, death rates from non-communicable diseases, lifestyle-related diseases like hypertension, heart disease, cancer, and type 2 diabetes far exceeded the deaths from communicable infectious diseases. And as you see on this slide, part of the reason is that our diet has radically shifted in the last 100 years. We have gone from, as you can see, 5 pounds of sugar per person per year in about 1900 to 141 pounds of sugar and sweeteners 100 years later. Oil has gone up 70 pounds. Meat consumption has increased more than 100 pounds per person per year. Cheese, you can see, up 30 pounds. Total calories, nearly 500 to 600 calories increase per day. And we've added 53 gallons of soft drinks and more than 4 hours of screen time. So as our country and our world searches for a solution to the burgeoning problem of healthcare expense, it's really right here on this slide. It's the lifestyle choices that we've made. It's the shift in the food on our plate over the last 100 years that has created this lifestyle disease epidemic that is now global. And in fact, in countries like the Middle Eastern countries and Africa, India, and China, they have much higher rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes than we do here in the United States. And it's largely because we have outsourced our lifestyle to these countries. But the good news, as we see this, is a shift back to a whole food plant-based plate, less processed food, removing animal products from our diet can solve these problems in a very short period of time. And we do have an obesity crisis around the world. In the United States today, nearly 42% of members of many states are obese. And almost 75% of our entire country is either obese or overweight. And we see that it's because the food has shifted. You know, the diet industry has largely failed people. And when we look at the dietary studies looking at success rates of diets, more than 85% of people will regain their weight within 5 years of going on a diet. So dieting is not the solution. The solution is a transition back to a whole food plant-based plate, eating food as grown, and beginning to return to a healthy lifestyle. And the research is verifying that non-communicable diseases are the problem. This study from JAMA, as you can see at the top, both dietary risks for deaths and disability are the #1 cause of death and disability in the United States today, above tobacco smoking, high body mass index, high blood pressure. So it's the food that we're eating that is the primary risk factor. And yet we're not talking about that in healthcare. We're not talking about that in the media. We may have these fancy or unique diets that come up every year. Every January or February or March, we hear new diets with new studies and new research that would indicate that this is the holy grail for dieting. But again, year after year, we continue to get heavier. We continue to suffer the consequences of our dietary choices with increasing rates of disability and death. But healthcare is beginning to wake up, and science, like studies like this from JAM in 2017, our findings showed that the increased intake of certain foods and not enough of others was associated with nearly half of all deaths in the United States due to heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. So at least there's a recognition that diet is important, and there's a shift in that direction, looking for better dietary solutions. One of the things that we have often forgotten, though, is that food is never neutral. And one of the dieting principles is the idea of burning calories, that we can somehow, eat away our indiscretions and exercise away excess calories. It's interesting, if we look at our lifetime, we will consume about 140,000 pounds of food, 87,000 meals, and nearly 50 million calories in a lifetime. And I don't know about you, but I'm not that good at math to manage balancing of 50 million calories on a daily basis. And so the calorie balance concept is a failed solution. We have to really shift toward eating calorie deficient foods that are nutrient dense, and that's plants. Hippocrates said this, and I think to our conversation today, that food is never neutral. He said healing is a matter of it's just not a matter of time, but also opportunity. And so, what we have to realize is that if we that we need to begin recognizing that the food that we're eating bite by bite is either causing healing or harm to our body. And in fact, we can see that in people that are consuming animal-based diet, that they begin to see a spike in inflammation within 2 hours of consuming those foods. These are elevated and TNF alpha. And so, and just a reminder for those that are on the webinar, if you'll just mute, I think that will make it easier for everyone. Sometimes we can hear that background noise, so thank you. But it's also important to remember that, it's not just removing animal products that makes us healthy. We have to remove some of the processed foods that contain high sugar, high oil, high preservatives that can also drive inflammation. And this is a study from Journal of the American College of Cardiology in 2017 that looked at plant-based diets, healthy plant-based diets, and unhealthy plant-based diet. And kind of the differentiation between an unhealthy plant-based diet and a healthy plant-based diet would be more whole plants and less processed food. But we can see the risk ratio, the risk of heart disease in the graph on the left actually goes up slightly with an unhealthy or a highly processed plant-based diet, but goes down with a healthy plant-based diet. And when they compare animal foods in the red line in the graph on the right with less healthy plant foods, we see that there's an increase in risk for heart disease as we eat more and more of these less healthy plant foods, or the processed plant foods. But as we eat more healthy plants, we see a decrease in the risk of heart disease. And so it's important as we begin to fill our plates to remember to fill the plate with lots of whole plant foods, large leafy green salads, steamed vegetables, and the addition of less healthy plant foods becomes more of a condiment and not the primary component of a plate. We also see the same for type 2 diabetes. And again, unhealthy plant-based diet in the red, healthy plant-based diet in the green. And we see that as if someone consumes more unhealthy plant food, they have an increased risk in getting type 2 diabetes. But with a healthy plant-based diet, you actually decrease diabetes. And part of the reason is that unhealthy plant-based diet, processed food can still have high fat content, a lot of oil. One of the primary drivers of insulin resistance is when fat gets into the muscle cells in the liver, and begins to disrupt the insulin signaling, causing insulin resistance. So a healthy plant-based diet is going to have lower amounts of oil and fat, freeing up those muscle and liver cells to have normal insulin signaling, so that when insulin binds to glucose and takes it to the cell, it can open the lock and allow the glucose to enter the cell. And so that's why, again, we're recommending lots of healthy plant foods to reduce your risk of insulin resistance. And so a plate looks like this. It's whole plant foods, and it's, you know, it's not just the absence of something from a diet that makes it healthy. It's the presence of all of the phytochemicals and the antioxidants and the fiber and the minerals and the vitamins that are in whole plant foods that optimize the health of every system in your body. And what's so beautiful about foods like this is they can be combined to make 1,000 different meals with a wide variety of tastes. And as you eat them, you're satisfied with the taste. And as they go down into your stomach, they create a natural stretch in the stomach, which turns off the receptors in the brain and hypothalamus that are associated with hunger signals. The nutrients also downregulate or turn off hunger signals. And so you satiate your taste buds, they're happy, your stomach is full, and your brain has turned off the hunger signals. And so you walk away feeling completely fulfilled from a meal that is actually then secondarily beginning to heal your body. I just want to take a minute to show you the power of food by telling you the story of a good friend of ours. This is Marcy Madrid. She's the Vice President of Population Health at Midland Health in Midland, Texas. And Marcy has done an amazing job of leading change at Midland Health. But in 2015, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and had significant symptoms that were impacting the quality of her life, impacting her ability to take care of her children, and even to perform her job at the hospital. Like most people, she saw the best neurologist in the healthcare system, who prescribed the disease-modifying drugs in an attempt to reduce the inflammation associated with her immune system attacking her brain and her spinal cord. The drugs all have side effects, and Marcy could not tolerate the side effects. She was feeling more disabled, would barely make it through a day's work, come home, collapse on the couch, was not able to go to her children's activities, and her husband, Carlos, was having to pick up most of the work at home. I had been starting some work with Midland, working with a cardiothoracic surgeon there, and she heard the message of whole food plant-based nutrition and a lifestyle change, and adopted that and saw incredible transformations in her life. These are two images of the MRI of her neck, her cervical MRI. And you can see in the middle picture on the left, surrounded by white, is her spinal cord. And you can see the spinal cord has lots of white patches inside of it. And that is a sign of inflammation, that her immune system is actually attacking her spinal cord. The image on the right was taken approximately 6 months after she started a dietary shift, and you can see the change in her spinal cord. All of the inflammation has nearly resolved. And her brain shows similar findings. The image on the left, in the kind of top right-hand corner of her brain, you see a large white spot. And again, that represents inflammation in the brain, where the immune cells are attacking that brain tissue, causing tingling, numbness, and weakness. And on the right, we see 6 months later that large lesion has nearly resolved. She was seeing a specialist in Dallas, Texas, and he said that he has never seen a change like this in his entire career. And he was so excited about plant-based nutrition that he started some research studies. And today, Marcy is leading an amazing transformation of her healthcare system, empowered by her own personal story and the amazing science that is there to support the power of lifestyle and plant-based nutrition to prevent, suspend, and reverse disease. And more importantly, it's not about the images and the numbers, it's about returning someone back to the quality of life so that they can spend time with their loved ones, pursuing their passions and accomplishing everything that they would hope to for their life. And I just want to step back one step and show you that, you know, plant-based nutrition is not just about transforming lives, but it also begins to transform healthcare systems and our world. Right now, according to the CDC, nearly 75% of the cost of our healthcare is related to lifestyle diseases. These are diseases that have a root in what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, how we manage stress, and habits such as smoking. And so Dr. Feinberg, who was now the past CEO of Geisinger Health, which is just up the road here in Pennsylvania, and a real advocate of lifestyle medicine, said we should be investing in people and processes and not building more hospitals. And so at Geisinger Health, they did. And they started a program called the Food Pharmacy that partnered with local food pantries and grocery stores to provide healthy food for their patients. They did a small study of 37 patients for 12 months, and they identified at-risk patients with significant diabetes that was not well controlled and that did not have easy access to food. They found that the pre-hemoglobin A1C, that's the measure of their blood glucose, and that should be about 5.5 or less, was 9.6. And in just 12 months, that had decreased to 7.5, which corresponded to a 40% decrease in the risk of death and serious consequences. They also found remarkably that mean healthcare costs are decreased by more than 80%, from about $240,000 per member per year to just $48,000 per member per year. And this is really important because this frees up funds within healthcare systems to take care of vulnerable populations, the uninsured, or emergency cases. And so it creates a much more equitable distribution of healthcare when we can begin reducing healthcare costs due to lifestyle-related diseases. And then if we take one more step out and we look at the production of food, we can see that a whole food plant-based diet is the optimal way to preserve the resources that we are stewarding for future generations. I just have two studies, but this is really an exciting area that helps us to understand the power of our plate to transform the world around us. This was the largest study to date in June of 2018 that included 38,700 farms in 119 countries. And they looked at 40 different food products that really represented about 90% of all the food that we eat. They found that more than 80% of the farmland in these 119 countries is used for livestock, but produces just 18% of the calories and 37% of the protein. But we can also see in this chart that it's producing 58%, at least 58% of the greenhouse gas emissions, 57% of the water pollution, 56% of air pollution, and 33% of freshwater withdrawals. In some regions of the world, they are draining their aquifers to create fish farms to produce animal protein, but not thinking that water is one of the most precious resources that we have today and in the future. All of this research prompted the lead researcher from Oxford, Dr. Joseph Poore, to say that agriculture is a sector that spans all the multitude of environmental problems. And it's not just agriculture, but it's the industrialized agriculture that is spanning the multitude of environmental problems. In industrial agriculture, especially the large animal agriculture, is a huge contributor to the loss of topsoil and the contamination of our water and our land. And due to the large agriculture today, we're also losing topsoil at incredible rates. It's estimated that a dump truck load of topsoil, precious topsoil that takes 100 years to create 1 inch of topsoil, one dump truck load is washing out into the Gulf of Mexico nearly every second because of the way that we are farming our land. So these environmental resources that we're stewarding for future generations are really dependent upon the way that we are producing our food. And so when we as consumers begin making different choices at the grocery store, at the point of purchase, at a farmer's market, and begin supporting more regenerative agriculture, more organic agriculture, and more thoughtful ways of growing food, we are also increasing the ability of our farmers to grow food in the right way that regenerates land, that protects waterways, and that protects the precious topsoil that we'll be giving to the next generation. This was another wonderful study that again confirms the power of our plate to change our world. And from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that looked at an analysis and valuation of the health and climate and co-benefits of dietary change, they reviewed 95 studies, and they found that as people shift toward more and more whole food plant-based diets, from vegetarian even to vegan, that there was the opportunity to save 8 million lives per year, or 120 million life years, quality of life years, that we would be able to reduce healthcare costs by $1.5 trillion, and that we would see a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas production. So the plate is perhaps one of the most powerful tools that we can use today to transform the world around us. And as we've all seen today, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, the COVID-19 has really revealed the weakness of our world and the weakness of our immune systems based upon the lifestyle diseases that have become endemic in all of the countries around the world. And so as we begin to shift toward eating more plants, we see a rapid improvement in the health of our immune system and a greater ability to fight off diseases like COVID-19 or H1N1 or any of the other common infections that we might come in contact with on a daily basis. So I'd like to just conclude with a few slides that would give you some direction on strengthening your own immune system so that you can be healthier and help your family stay safe during this pandemic. So first and most important is eat a wide variety of vegetables. You know, it's estimated that as we eat a meal, we consume more than 150 different phytochemicals. The phytochemicals are the small chemicals that contribute to the color of the different plants, but each of these phytochemicals works a little bit differently in our body. And not only do they work independently differently, but they work synergistically like a symphony in our body to reduce inflammation, to optimize our immune system, to help to heal cells, to turn off the epigenetic switches that would make us susceptible to disease. And so having a multicolored plate with a wide variety of vegetables every day enhances your body's ability to fight infections. There's been more and more research coming out that really advocates for the benefit of adding mushrooms to your diet. Mushrooms through a multitude of ways enhance the immune system, and they can really increase your body's ability to fight viruses and bacteria. One of the ways that they do that is through the fiber that's in the mushrooms that help to feed the microbiome to increase the effectiveness of your immune system. Your microbiome, which is the 100 trillion bacteria that live in your gut, are responsible for more than 70% of the health of your immune system. So as you feed those bacteria the right fiber, they will begin to produce factors that increase your immune system's ability to fight infections. Some of those are short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate, which is a byproduct of the breakdown of fiber. It's released into your bloodstream. It normalizes blood sugars, but it also turns off inflammation in your body, which is a key step in prevention and protection against COVID-19. One of the things that we've seen with COVID-19 is the cytokine storm, and cytokines are just inflammatory reactive molecules. And so for people that have already elevated levels of inflammation or a sensitized inflammatory system, such as people with lifestyle diseases or obesity, the virus activates the inflammatory system, and we see this huge burst of inflammation that causes extensive damage throughout the body. The production of these short-chain fatty acids by the bacteria in our gut when we eat something like mushrooms turns off some of those key inflammatory switches, the master switches, so it downregulates, it dials down inflammation in our body. So even if somebody gets COVID-19, there's not that aggressive cytokine storm that causes significant both short and long-term damage in people that are fighting COVID-19. Herbs and spices are a tremendous benefit in aiding the body and boosting the immune system. And in many cases, herb spices and sprouts have 5 to 10 times more phytochemicals than plants, than vegetables, or even fruits. And so using these to flavor your foods can really enhance not only the flavor of the food and the enjoyment of the food, but also the power of your body to fight disease. One of the other ways that herbs and spices really enhance your health is by normalizing the growth of blood vessels. And herbs and spices can actually begin to turn off the growth of blood vessels into cancer cells and turn on the growth of blood vessels to tissues that are not healing well. And so it's a powerful way to normalize the angiogenesis system. Beans and lentils also boost your immune system. They're a great source of protein, up to 18 to 20 grams of protein per cup. They really help to satiate or make you feel full after a meal. They're a tremendous addition. There's a multitude of beans and lentils that can be added with different colors and tastes. But the fibers, again, in beans and lentils really help to feed the microbiome in the gut and stabilize and grow a healthy microbiome, which produces a really healthy immune system. Activity is important, and it's been found that people that are active have healthier immune systems and are more resistant to viruses and bacteria. So it's important to get outside, to find something that you do, and I use the word activity rather than exercise, because activity is just going out and getting your heart rate up for hopefully 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, in something that you enjoy. It can be dancing, it can be weightlifting, it can be soccer, it can even be playing with your children or the children in your life for 30 minutes, 5 times a week. But I encourage you to do something. Take a break from your work, take a break from the screens or social media, and find something that you love to do, and do it with gusto, because that will really make a difference. The studies also show that when you're exercising, you're growing new brain cells called neurogenesis and increasing blood flow to your brain, so it reduces the risk of cognitive decline with aging. Sleep is also really critical to a robust and healthy immune system. And all the studies show that we should be sleeping 7 to 8 hours per night. And I know that's challenging for all of us because of the screen time and text and email, but I would really encourage you to begin to set some boundaries around your sleep. And I would encourage you to turn off your screens an hour before you go to bed. The light from the screens can disrupt the pineal gland in the brain, which is the kind of moderator of our sleep through a hormone called melatonin. And so turning off the screens, turning off the television, creating a healthful sleep hygiene practice will really enhance your immune system. So make sure that you take time, and if you're on shift work, it's really important to make sure that you get a good night's sleep. Through my years working with shift workers, I've often found that they really cheat their sleep and get maybe 4 or 5 hours per night. And all the research shows that people working shift work have much higher rates of heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and death, because they're often short on sleep, and that disruption in their sleep causes chronic inflammation. And then finally, number 7 is stress reduction. When we carry stress on our bodies, and stress can be from a multitude of places, it can be fear, it can be financial stress, it can be relational stress, it can be work stress, but anytime we hold stress inside, it disrupts the microbiome. The cortisol, the stress hormone, disrupts the microbiome and begins to decrease our body's ability to fight infections. And so I always encourage people, get to the root of the cause of the stress in your life and find a solution. If we need to release things, we release those. If we need to forgive people, we forgive. If we need to make changes in our finances, we make changes. But it's really important for your health or the health of your family that you solve the stress challenge in your life. And then finally, I just like to put all of this in perspective and say that, we're not seeking perfection. Confucius once said that he would rather have a diamond with a flaw than a perfect pebble. And so this is not a black or white decision. This is a recognition that the more plants that I add in my diet, there's a greater capacity to regenerate every system in my body. But also the more plants that we add into our diet, there's a greater regenerative capacity for agriculture, for healthcare systems, for family finances. It impacts everything around the world. And so I always encourage people, just keep moving along that pathway toward more and more plant-based plate. And the faster that you move that direction, the faster you will see personal changes, the faster that we will see community and global changes as well. And so we'll just take a moment here and we'll make a transition. And I think we have a good 25 minutes to answer questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And Tom, I'll let you kind of moderate and find some of the questions, and you can just let me know those questions and I'll get through as many as I possibly can in the next 24 minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I think maybe we could just start with, we just got a question about, it says, it'd be amazing to see the stats on the number of serious cases of COVID and or deaths in plant-based patients versus non-plant-based patients. Now, I'm not sure that data is there yet or that kind of study has been done, but I think we know some people that are headed in that direction as far as gathering that information. So any thoughts you have on that? I responded, I didn't think the data was available right now, but any further thoughts from you?
Yeah, actually, I've spoken with several people around the country to try and gather this data, but it's just not possible to acquire that data right now. It's hard to find enough patients that are plant-based with COVID to compare to the large number of unhealthy people that have COVID. And in talking with some great researchers around the country, it's the difficulty in pulling this study together. It would not be possible, and there would be a lot of co-founders. But I think you're absolutely right. It would be an amazing opportunity to gather that information. And perhaps once we get through some of this, we'll be able to do some retrospective look at that data and just get a general idea of the number of patients that were plant-based and the severity of their outcomes. If we look at the other data and we see that, more than 40% of all the deaths were people that had obesity. 70% of those hospitalized had hypertension. More than 98% of people hospitalized in like New York and Louisiana were either older than 65, were obese, dealing with hypertension, heart disease, or diabetes, that handful. So we can see from the data that the majority of the people that are hospitalized with severe cases and or dying from COVID have that handful of lifestyle-related diseases, age, or obesity.
Thanks, Scott. And then let's see, just a quick follow-up. Elizabeth asked, we could at least survey members of plant-based organizations, see if prevalence rates and severity are different from the general population. So I think that's something we can, see if we can pull together. But like you said, I think in some ways it's almost telling that we can't find enough COVID patients that are eating plant-based diet. Maybe that's an indication of the effectiveness in and of itself. I know that's not a scientific data point that we could use, but just an interesting point.
Yeah, do you have another question, Tom?
Yep. So next question. So we had a few about organic versus non-organic. So I won't ask a specific question about that. Why don't you just give us, 2 minutes on organic and non-organic plant-based foods?
Yeah, sure. So, most importantly, I always encourage my patients, just eat more plants. If the cost of organic is prohibitive or access to organic is limited, the studies show that just simply eating more plants, conventionally grown plants, you will get healthier. There's also some early data that would suggest that when we eat plants, some of the phytochemicals in the plants help to mitigate the impact of pesticides and herbicides in our body. We do know that, there's research showing that herbicides like glyphosate will negatively impact the microbiome, and that can cause significant disruption in our health. So there are some potentially significant long-term implications for being exposed to pesticides and herbicides long-term. We also know that, farm families that are exposed to large amounts of pesticides have significant complications with lower birth rates, more difficulty during pregnancy, lower IQs in their children, increased rates of leukemia. So high exposures to these, especially in children, can be an issue. But one of the other parts of the organic conventional food conversation that we often don't talk about is the increased number of phytochemicals that are present in organic vegetables compared to the lower amounts that are present in conventionally grown fruits and vegetables. So organic that is grown in rich soil with a farmer that really understands soil science will have between 40 and 60% more phytochemicals or antioxidants. And so if you're getting that increase at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we know that the power of antioxidants and phytochemicals to help fight infections, alter epigenetics, turn off those genes that we might have inherited from our parents for lifestyle-related diseases like hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and cancer, alter the growth of blood vessels in angiogenesis and normalize that system, have a hormonal impact on the body, reduce inflammation, among many other impacts of those phytochemicals. If we're getting more of those with every meal because we're consuming more organic fruits and vegetables, there's a real health benefit in eating those. So it's not just the absence of pesticides or herbicides, but it's the health benefit that we're getting from the added phytochemicals and antioxidants. But also, as we step beyond ourselves and our own body and our own physiology and disease risk, we can see that when we begin investing in organic, especially regenerative organic produce, we are investing in farm families because we are helping farm families that are stepping out and saying, I want to grow food in the most natural way that protects the land, that regenerates the soil. We're helping those families to earn a living. We're helping those families avoid the consequences of pesticides and herbicides. We are helping to regenerate the loss of topsoil. We're helping to protect our waterways from the runoff of pesticides and herbicides. We're contributing to the reduction in CAFOs, certified animal feeding operations, because we're buying more organic plants. So that decision that we're making when we're purchasing goes far beyond ourselves, but we're actually making an investment in other farm families. We're making an investment in the preservation of topsoil, of land, air, and water that we're stewarding as an inheritance for the future generations. And so, while we often think about ourselves when we make this decision about herbicides or pesticides or our family, the children that we're serving, it's also a much bigger decision and a much more exciting opportunity, I think, when you're purchasing those foods, to know that you are investing in the future of our world.
Okay, thanks, Scott. All right, so next question is, let's see, I started making and drinking 16-ounce celery juice daily. Fresh juice is always better, but because it's labor intensive, I usually make a batch and use it over 3 days. Are any of the nutrients lost, or how many of the nutrients are lost after the first day?
Yeah, whenever we make juices or smoothies, whenever we, even bring fresh fruits and vegetables home that have been picked and we keep them in a refrigerator, there is a decline every day in the number of available nutrients, especially phytochemicals and antioxidants. Our fruits and vegetables continue to respire or breathe. And so the way that we store those things can be important by having some holes inside of the plastic containers. But the longer that you keep something in the refrigerator, you will lose some of those nutrients. Now, in a day or even 2 days, it may not be substantial, but by 3 days, you may lose up to 30 to 50% of some of those nutrients. And so it's better to make those things fresh, to get your fruits and vegetables as fresh as possible. There are studies that have shown that when a strawberry is picked on the West Coast and shipped to the East Coast, it can lose up to 90% of its phytochemical content or phytochemical activity. And so, we may be buying strawberries, but not getting the impact of the phytochemicals because they've been lost over that period of time. So the fresher, the better. The more closely we eat that fruit or vegetable to the time that it was picked, the healthier that it will be inside of our bodies.
Okay, how about, so sweeteners now. So it says, what are the effects of plant-based artificial sweeteners like stevia, monk fruit, and on the gut microbiome?
That is a great question. That's an evolving question with really interesting science that is coming out, regularly on the impacts of these. There's been with the obesity epidemic, we're always looking for non-caloric sweeteners to add to our foods. And because we're all interested in more natural sweeteners, we've looked at things like stevia and some of the other non-caloric sweeteners like monk fruit. And as we begin to uncover some of the science, we're seeing that the regular use of stevia can disrupt the microbiome and begin contributing to a dysbiosis. Monk fruit, much less so. There's not conclusive evidence, but perhaps monk fruit as well can contribute in small ways to a dysbiosis. So I always recommend with a lot of these alternative sweeteners that you use them in smaller amounts less frequently. It may be nice to have some monk fruit around if you're making a birthday cake or a nice dessert for a weekend and to use it. And even with more whole leaf stevia, if you wanted to use that for an occasional sweetener, that should be fine. But if we're using them on a regular basis, they can contribute to dysbiosis. But it's always important to put a lot of this into perspective that yes, these may be contributing to dysbiosis and disruption of the gut, but it's really much more important to look at the totality of your diet. And if you're eating predominantly whole food plant-based diet, getting a small amount of monk fruit, once or twice a week, you're really in pretty good shape. And so, it's important. I always recommend, as much as you can, go to more whole food sweeteners. We use a lot of dates and figs. We will even use bananas or some other alternatives of whole foods to sweeten a lot of the food that we would eat on a daily basis. And the beautiful thing is you're doing this, your taste buds are shifting, called neuroadaptation. Within 2 weeks, your taste buds begin to adapt and become more sensitive to the taste of plants and less sensitive to that hyper sweet that you would need in a stevia or monk fruit. And so you actually begin to enjoy the subtle flavors of food and you don't need that big hit of sweetener. And so, that's a nice way to begin shifting out of requiring something sweet every day, is to just begin cutting that back and using any of these sweetened foods just occasionally. But it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because it's a really important conversation in the plant-based world and even the healthy eating world. One final thing is that if we're using these sweeteners on a regular basis, it actually can increase our appetite. And so when you use a non-caloric sweetener and you take that in, it increases the body's thought or desire to add more calories and more sweet to the diet in the future. And so it can drive appetite and it can actually drive increased consumption of food and weight gain over time.
Okay, so next question, it says, can you recommend a documentary with current research on diet disease and diet sustainability? It says that Beth asked this, she's already showed, let's see, What the Health, Forks Over Knives, Game Changers. So those are the kind of the three we all know about. Another good one is Fed Up. I think that was a Katie Couric documentary.
Yeah, Eating You Alive is a great one.
Eating You Alive.
Yeah, that's an excellent one. And there are more that are coming out that I know of. There's some excellent ones. And I think maybe we'll work with Ben to post some of those names of some of those documentaries if people are interested.
Yeah, and there's another good one that's not, I mean, it's somewhat health focused. It's definitely health focused, but it's more healthcare system focused. But it's called Escape Fire. It's a really terrific documentary. It kind of weaves in the health, the health issues out there in the country, and it weaves it into how the system works. Really, really well done too. So that's another good one.
Got Ben here. If we want to put together a list of these to go out on our news site, we can talk about that after the call.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Ben.
Great. All right, so question about CRP as a measurement. So is CRP a good measurement of bodily inflammation, and would a low CRP generally be a good indicator of the ability to fight infectious disease, particularly COVID and things like that?
Yeah, so CRP, C-reactive protein, has been used as a measure of inflammation, as a lab marker of inflammation for many years. We've moved toward HS-CRP, which is a high-sensitive CRP, which is a little better measure of inflammatory levels. It's interesting, there was a study that looked at like a high nutrient dense plant-based diet versus a lower nutrient dense plant-based diet. And they looked at the marker HSCRP, the inflammation. And they found that the people on the high nutrient dense, that's like darker greens, darker berries, darker beans, had a significant reduction in inflammation, but those that were on more white type plants had a slight increase in their HSCRP over the course of 2 weeks. And so it's just a good reminder that, CRP is, number one, a good measure of inflammation, that our diet can impact inflammation even in a short period of time over the course of 2 weeks, that eating more nutrient-rich plants, darker berries, darker greens, reduces that level of inflammation. If your HSCRP is low, it's generally a good sign that your body is able to mitigate the impact of the environment, including food and stress and toxin exposure, and that you have a lower inflammation level and a more stable immune system. And as we're seeing with COVID-19, elevated CRP levels are associated with a more rapid cytokine storm and some more adverse outcomes. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. The lower that we can drive the inflammation in our body, the more that we can turn off those master switches that I talked about earlier today, like NF-kappa beta through a plant-based diet, through mushrooms, the better that we are able to endure or go through an infectious process and come out on the other side healthy at the end.
Great, thank you. All right, so next question. Dr. Campbell and others have talked extensively about the effects of animal protein on cancer. What about the role of animal protein on heart disease compared to dietary fats and cholesterol? And this ties into another question, which basically just said, what's the deal with cholesterol? Is it good, bad? There's a lot of confusing information. So I guess we can kind of tie all that together.
Yeah, so this is in about 7 minutes. This is actually a really big topic. So I'll hit some of the highlights, but this is it's really important research, and the details are really critical to making good long-term choices. So just briefly with the cholesterol question, there was in the research through the production of the statins, there was this very strong narrative that was woven into the research that high cholesterol equals heart disease and death. And so they told the story very powerfully in such a way that it made us all believe that if you have high cholesterol, you will have heart disease and you may die. But as we know, all of us are biochemically different, and the story is not quite that simple or clear, because there are people that have high cholesterol levels and they don't get heart disease and they don't die. And there are people that have low cholesterol levels, according to current standards, and they will have a heart attack. So it's not as simple as just lower your cholesterol and never have heart disease. Because heart disease can be driven by a number of things, including stress, inflammation, due to toxins and other things, including sugar. So what I recommend is like that you look at this from a more holistic standpoint and say, yes, we do need to lower our cholesterol levels. When we talk with experts like Dr. Kim Williams, past president of the American College of Cardiology, he says that lower cholesterols are associated with lower rates of heart disease. And so he recommends that people have cholesterol levels, total cholesterol levels lower than 150. LDL is definitely lower than 100 and lower than 80 if possible. The good news is we know that as we reduce processed oils out of our diet, as we eliminate animal products and dairy, our cholesterol levels naturally go down. There are a couple of plant-based products that can drive up cholesterol levels that we just need to be aware of, and that's coconut oil and nuts and seeds. And so, using those in smaller amounts, or if you're biochemically sensitive, even small amounts of those can drive your cholesterol levels. So having your blood tested and following those things is important. But sometimes cholesterol is really just a marker of something in your diet that's causing an inflammatory reaction. Cholesterol is not bad. It's not something that's that is, we don't want any cholesterol in our body because it's actually a component of cell membranes. And it's a response to injury in cells and the regeneration of cells. And so your liver produces cholesterol. It's often taken to parts of the body where the body's rebuilding, where there's been damage. And that's one of the reasons that we see even cholesterol in arteries, is that it's being taken to those areas where there's cell injury to try and repair some of that cellular damage. Unfortunately, as it gets there, because of the inflammatory condition bite by bite that we continue to drive, the cholesterol gets oxidized, it gets laid down on top of the arteries like cement and begins to grow and create narrowing inside of those arteries. But as many of you know, the research shows that as we begin to shift aggressively in the direction of a lifestyle change, including a whole food plant-based diet, cholesterol is naturally decreased. Those soft plaques inside of arteries can be eliminated, reduced or eliminated. And even the hard plaques that are calcified, the body can begin growing blood vessels around those plaques and create its own bypass. And so we can almost essentially make ourselves heart attack proof with a whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle. And I simply add almost because there are some subtle things like stress and sugar that can contribute to heart disease as well. But certainly, as we started out with the question, eliminating animal products, eliminating dairy, eliminating processed food is a huge step in the right direction. It's a great question. I wish we had more time. We can do a couple of presentations on that, but hopefully that gives you some general direction and answers part of the question anyway.
Thanks, Doc. So this is always a good one. Is there any research on the benefits of intermittent fasting in conjunction with a plant-based diet?
Yeah, the research on intermittent fasting is really intriguing and inspiring. And, I practice intermittent fasting and recommend it frequently to all of my patients who are even on a whole food plant-based diet. We see that intermittent fasting has really a number of positive effects on the body. It reduces inflammation. It helps to heal the microbiome. Helps to reduce any gut inflammation that might lead to like a leaky gut. It helps to normalize hormones. It boosts growth hormone. It helps with reparative processes. We see that intermittent fasting is associated with better sleep, better mood, better energy, a greater weight opportunity to normalize your weight. The research shows that when people eat the same number of calories in a shorter period of time, especially in the morning, that they tend to have greater weight loss and a greater ability to normalize their weight than those that would eat the same amount of calories later in the day. And so an intermittent fasting routine typically has you fasting from early afternoon, early dinner until a late breakfast, and then eating those calories earlier in the day. So it works with that research that's going to make it much easier for your body to burn calories, normalize weight, and maintain a healthy body weight. It also is really good for overcoming some of the food addiction, emotional eating patterns that most of us have really had to work out of our lives because of Western society. And that discipline of either being on like a 16-8, where you're off food for 16 hours and just eating for 8 hours, the discipline of being off really helps to break some of those addiction patterns and gives you control back in your life over the food that you're eating. So yes, if you have not done that, I would recommend that you try it. You can, even just start with like a 12 on, 12 off and work towards like a 16-8, where you're eating, for 8 hours during the course of the day. And then the 16 hours, you're resting your gut and not eating. During those times you're not eating, you can have a cup of tea, you go for a walk, drink a lot of water, but just close up the kitchen after that point in time. And I think you'll find a lot of benefits. So thank you. That was a great question.
Thanks, Doc. A couple of questions here about the food, the plant-based foods movement. And so I don't know if you have just some thoughts on, what you see, where it's going, how it's been beneficial. Since this, so I'm sure some of the group here is part of that industry. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I could not be more excited about the plant-based movement and where it is now. My family and I started this journey almost 18 years ago, and there have been many that have been on this journey much longer than we have. But in the last 5 years, as many of you can attest, as Ben, as Dad Joel can attest, in the last 5 years, we have seen a huge shift in momentum toward plant-based foods. And, all of us can see the evidence of this. Panera Bread has a plant-based menu. You walk into your grocery store and there are a number of plant-based alternatives. Beyond Meat was the most successful food IPO in 30 years. So the plant-based movement has really picked up speed. And in my conversations with people that are at a higher level working in the industry and having conversations with even large animal producing products, these corporations are making note that the plant-based movement is here, and that even inside of some of these large organizations like chicken farmers and beef farmers and pork producers, they're looking for plant-based alternatives to their meat products because they see that that is the future. And so they're investing in infrastructure to produce those kinds of plant-based proteins for the future. So I think that the movement is strong. Healthcare needs to catch up. There's at least a much greater awareness amongst healthcare providers and healthcare systems that lifestyle and food are important. But until we see a reimbursement for hospitals and clinicians to help people make that change, I think there's going to be a lagging in healthcare. We need to, in healthcare, have the opportunity to get paid to help somebody reverse their disease and come off their medications and stop coming to see us. But right now, healthcare is volume-based, and so healthcare systems get paid for more patients and more procedures. But once that shifts, I think that we'll see a huge spike in lifestyle medicine and plant-based nutrition in healthcare. Certainly, there are barriers for adoption. There are lots of competing sciences from the paleo and keto world, but I think we have a lot of things on our side. And that's why I like to try to talk about the totality of the benefit of a plant-based diet, not just the biochemical benefit or reducing inflammation or even reducing personal disease or the enhancement of health in a family or children's lives. But when we step out and we look at the benefits in the financial solvency of nations around the world, and when we look at the agricultural and environmental impacts of the food that we're eating, and we can begin to see that a plant-based plate is the solution for so many things, I think it makes our case much stronger and gives us a much more powerful platform to advocate for plant-based nutrition. So I am so excited that I'm still young and vibrant and healthy, and I will get to see another 50 years of the transformation of our world through plant-based nutrition. And I know that many of you and Tom and Ben and Joel on the call here too are, we're all in. We're going to join together with you to continue to move the world toward plant-based living and plant-based nutrition.
So, all right, so we're getting close to the end here, time-wise. So let's do a couple of quick ones, or one quick one. So the difference. So you talked about sleep. Is there any difference, or is there much of a difference between the times at which people sleep? So you mentioned 7 to 9 hours. So let's say someone gets 8 hours from 11 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning. Is that any different, better, worse than, say, going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and waking up at 10 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, it's really interesting when we look at the spikes of hormones overnight, we really begin to see that our bodies were wired to go to sleep between 10 and 11 and wake up somewhere around 6. You know, shortly after that 10, going into the 10 p.m., 11 p.m. timeline, there's a spike in melatonin, which is a sleep hormone. Shortly after that, like right around midnight to about 2, we have a spike in growth hormone, which is the reparative hormone that helps to regenerate, repair tissue. And then about 6 a.m., our cortisol levels, which is our stress hormone, begin to naturally rise. And it would be associated with the body kind of waking up, getting moving, increasing the blood pressure to get out of bed and get started with the day. So the research would really point us to the fact that your entire system has been hardwired to try and go to sleep between 10 and 11 and get up, you know, around 6 o'clock. So 7 to 8 hours of sleep overnight. And we see that, you know, as people shift out of those with the different, you know, shift work that we have today, second and third shift, that those people suffer increased risks of depression, lifestyle related diseases, inflammation, and those spikes of growth hormone are much more diminished because of that shift out of that normal time frame of sleep.
Thanks, Doc. Hey, I don't know if are you familiar with OsteoStrong?
OsteoStrong. I am not familiar with that product.
It's not a drug. I don't know exactly what it is. I just looked it up. It's new to me because someone was asking, do we have an opinion on whether OsteoStrong can substantially increase?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to go back and do some research.
Yeah, I never heard of it either. So I took a look at it. It looks interesting. It's not a pill or anything like that. It doesn't seem to be. It's just seems to be some sort of fitness system, or I don't know. But maybe we'll take a look at that and kind of get back to that. All right. So next question was, let's see, as a pediatrician, what can I tell parents that are vegan for kids during the first year of life to drink aside from cow's milk after, 6 months of breastfeeding? So good drinks for kids other than milk.
So I really recommend, first, we have a great resource with the Plant Nutrition Project. I worked with several pediatricians to write a quick start guide for pediatricians, for families, and for children. So if you go to our website, plantnutritionproject.org, and look under quick start guides, there's a great resource for families and children. It's our quick start guide for children. So that would be a great resource. But, we typically recommend that nursing as long as possible, as I know that as a pediatrician, is beneficial. And then once people make that shift, or when children are shifting and being weaned, we recommend typically water, or a green smoothie is a great way to get more nutrients in with kale and berries. So that's also a good alternative. I'm not a big advocate of doing plant-based milks right away for children. Especially some of the plant-based milks can be high in sugar or have some preservatives. I would not be opposed to just making some of your own nut-based milk from organic nuts if somebody wanted to do that. But I typically just recommend transitioning to water and or a smoothie after a little child has been weaned from mama's milk. But I really hope that you find that resource is helpful. We've really had great feedback on the Quick Start Guide for children. And I'd encourage you to pick that up.
Okay, great. All right, so last one, Scott, and then maybe you want to talk a little bit about the conference, give some of the details about the conference. I was trying to avoid it, but you mentioned it. So paleo, we had a couple of paleo keto questions. So we hear a lot about paleo and keto. Maybe just 2 minutes on like what is paleo and keto? What does it mean? What does it actually mean? What does it do? And why do people seem to talk a lot about it? And how is it different from plant-based diet?
Okay. Again, just a huge topic and a
Right.
huge,
I know. That's why I was trying to avoid it, but you brought it up, so.
I'll do a high level, but I think I can hit the high points. So some of the good things with, so paleo diet focuses on protein, avoiding processed food. They advocate for eating vegetables. Keto shifts further into eating a high fat diet with some protein and eliminating many fruits, beans, and other possible carbohydrates. So the positives of those are that they're getting rid of processed food and eliminating sugar. And so some of the positive benefits that we see in the research for paleo and keto is the fact that they have eliminated processed food and sugar, which is very good. And on that platform, I would agree with that recommendation. The challenge comes in the research around animal products, inflammation, colon cancer, heart disease, and disruption of the microbiome. And so, some of the studies, especially like paleo or keto, have found that people living with diabetes put on a ketogenic diet significantly improve their blood sugars and are able to titrate down off of medications. And there are some companies like Virta Health that have really advocated for studies and have a lot of money and are promoting programs for ketogenic interventions for type 2 diabetes. Well, their blood sugars go down because they're not eating any carbohydrates at all. And we know that insulin resistance is driven by the packing of the muscle and liver cells with fat. And so what we see is people come off of a ketogenic diet, their muscle and liver cells are packed with fat and they've disrupted their insulin signaling. So the minute that they add carbohydrates back into their life, they have a huge spike in insulin resistance. So the only way that keto works long-term is if you stay on a ketogenic diet. But we know from the research that there are many components of animal protein or animal products that can be inflammatory to the body and are associated with increased disease rates. Their heme iron, the blood iron from animals, is associated with increased inflammation, increased rates of insulin resistance and diabetes. We know endotoxin, which is the outer covering of bacteria in animal products, is associated with spikes in inflammation within 2 to 4 hours. New5GC, which is a protein in animals but not in humans, is associated with inflammation and disease. We know saturated fat is an inflammatory molecule, causes inflammation in the lining of the blood vessels called the endothelium and is associated with heart disease as well. These animal products disrupt the microbiome. So within 24 hours of eating a diet high in animal products, there's a noticeable difference in the types of bacteria that live in the microbiome, and they shift towards types of bacteria that produce inflammatory molecules like trimethylene oxide, TMAO. And TMAO has been associated with increased risk of kidney disease, heart disease, cancer, and cognitive decline. So, while the short-term studies may show benefit for keto and paleo diets, I think that long-term there's significant risk for consuming these animal products. And then if we step back one step further, like we talked about earlier in the lecture, if we look at just the sustainability of choices around animal foods, we see that 80% of the farmland is producing only 18% of the protein, 37% of calories, and that that's not sustainable for the entire world to go on a paleo or keto diet. And we have a global healthcare crisis and epidemic around lifestyle diseases that cannot be solved by a ketogenic or paleo diet because we can't produce enough animals. to treat the population without totally decimating all of our resources. So for multiple reasons, it's not the right choice. And then finally, just for animal welfare, we cannot produce animals to feed a population in a humane way. And so, from animal welfare to the environment to your own personal health, the keto and paleo diets, ketogenic and paleo diets are not the right choice. A plant-based diet solves everything, and that's why I feel so delighted to be in this place, because the answers are easy.
Thanks, Doc. And so maybe just a minute on the conference details, and then we can kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. And we're so thankful to be, able to reach healthcare providers around the world with a lot of this science. And we take a much deeper dive than we have today for healthcare providers into the molecular science of plant-based nutrition, of food, and the linkage between disease, and not just prevention, but also reversal. And so with Tom and my other partner, Susan Benegas, who's not with us today, we started a conference in 2013 called the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, which has grown. And now our large conference, which is typically in California every year except this year, we have about 1,200 attendees from 26 different countries, healthcare providers, and 70% are physicians. And so we've also partnered with Ben and Joel Davis to host a conference on the East Coast every year, and in other countries, as I mentioned earlier. The conference is a continuing medical education conference designed to give physicians the advancing science of whole food plant-based nutrition, along with the resources and tools and information they need to be able to apply that science in their daily practice and help their patients prevent and suspend and reverse disease. This year, because of the pandemic, we had to pivot, and just like this webinar, we're doing a virtual conference. And the silver lining is that we are able to reach out around the world. Typically, we have a limited amount of space because we serve 3 meals a day and we have space constraints. But this year, because it's virtual and with unlimited registration, we are thankful that we can reach into every country around the world with this vital information about plant-based nutrition. So for those of you that might be interested, registration information and more about the conference, our agenda and the incredible lineup of speakers that we have this year can be found at pbnhc.com. And I think Tom has posted that in the chat that I see here. So we would love to have any of you join us, but I also encourage you, maybe share it with your physician as well. We would love to have them join us for the conference this year, and to begin to see that the science is really sound. And while there needs to be more science, the science that we have is fantastic, and it is sound, and it is enough science for a healthcare clinician to make the decision to recommend a whole food plant-based diet to their patients. If you have any questions, please let Tom or I know, and we'll be happy to get back to you and try to answer those questions.
Yeah, so, and the one other thing, obviously, given the fact that we were the healthcare provider, education provider for Plant-Based World in New York City, because of the pandemic and because Plant-Based World Conference and Expo was canceled, we've kind of merged the healthcare track from Plant-Based World, which should have been in June of this year. We've merged that with our regular conference, and so we're happy to provide this to to those people that were set on attending the healthcare track at Plant-Based World at the Javits Center this year, again, which obviously was canceled. So the fact that we've merged the two together, I thought was a great idea, and kudos to Ben and his team, for kind of bringing it up and making sure that his constituents still got this opportunity to see this healthcare education. So all good stuff. And so yeah, if you were planning on attending New York, the healthcare track at the Plant-Based World Conference and Expo, this is something that you can do. Like I said, we've merged the two together. So.
Well, thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day to join us. Thank you, Ben and Joel, for all the work that you're doing and your visionary work with Plant-Based World, for hosting this webinar. Thank you, Tom, for your moderation and background work on all the technical aspects of the webinar. And we all just wish you and your families all the best, safety and health and wellness. And we just hope that you will take and spread this message to everybody that you know, because we can transform the world one life at a time. So until we have an opportunity to meet again, blessings to you all and your families. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.